So let us go to what is now round 4. Carolyn, you are
Okay.
the initiator.
Okay, let me find. Okay, this was a story that I read about and loved. It was about the wonderful violinist Joshua Bell, who decided.
Yes.
Now, this is a while ago. This was 2007, and I read it in an article in the Washington Post. Anyway, he decided it would be fun. He was quite young then, to stand, just not announce who he was. And he stood in front of an arcade outside of Washington, D.C. subway stop and started playing. And he had he had his hat out in front of him. And most people passed him right by. In all fairness, it was rush hour in the morning. But he collected $30 after 45 minutes of playing his heart out with his beautiful technique. So this is On Deaf Ears. On Deaf Ears. This fiddle player is a fake. Dressed in the uniform of teens, a long-sleeved t-shirt, cap, and jeans, he hopes his melody will wake up passers-by who pass him by outside a DC subway stop. With open violin case as prop, he tries to catch the bleary eye and penetrate the potted ear. 3 days before, an eager crowd stood cheering as the maestro bowed. They paid 100 each to hear. A harried mom, her son beside her, tugs at the craning 3-year-old who has a date with Mrs. Gold to practice Eensy Weensy Spider. The shoeshine lady fears a drop in tips because distracting noise has silenced coffee chat. She toys with calling for a transit cop. One woman knows the face, the sound, the closed eyes, the ecstatic swaying. One man, stopped by the brilliant playing, stands rooted as to sacred ground. But most refuse to slow their pace. Too crushed by time, too rushed for beauty, they're caught inside the wheel of duty, advancing as they run in place.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I saw television. I'm sorry, I saw a report on this when he did it. I remember seeing video of him playing.
Yeah, I saw the same report. Yeah, very cool, very charming. Well, great ending. Advancing as they run in place. That says a lot in very few words. Well, the whole anecdote is well worth memorializing, and you do it so wittily with very deft rhyme, and I love the beside her Eensy Weensy Spider, and it's just very deft.
It's such a wonderful story, and he was so playful to do it.
Yes, yeah. I think this is very well done. The meter, it just swings right along. And then I like this, well, she toys with calling for the transit. I like this shoeshine lady. I don't know if that was in the story we saw on the PBS or not, but that the shoeshine lady is, she's in competition with him.
I thought I made it.
And she toys with calling for the transit cops. If you just made that up, that's a very good stroke of it. And so is the Eensy. All this stuff, I don't know how much of this was, obviously wasn't in the Washington Post story, all this. So you're making a lot of this stuff up. And I think it's really terrific. And then I like this rooted as to sacred ground. I mean, that takes the poem to a deeper, it's like having God come into that other Lord or so, whatever was in your other poem. They were gods that wrote this music. Suddenly here again, the real giant nature of this great music asserts itself, announces itself. So I really like this one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. This, I remember seeing the video of it and thinking how there's a very good chance if I were going from one subway stop to another, I would have rushed on by. It's hard when you are sitting comfortably and seeing a video of this and hearing him play you say to yourself, how could anyone possibly just keep walking? He was playing so beautifully. But of course, you understand how that can happen.
No, I'm not surprised at all that that could happen, because in New York, the people doing this are great musicians.
Yes.
They're 98% as good as Joshua Bell, if not 99.5% as good as Joshua Bell. And so hearing a wonderful violinist busking is just par for the course to me. It wouldn't bring me up short. Which, you know, that's just the way, which says something to me about the level, at least in urban centers. There are so many brilliant musicians. I'll tell you just a funny story. There's a woman, a violinist in the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra. I probably shouldn't say her name, but I certainly know her name. I met her at a music camp somewhere where she was on the faculty. She grew up in Seattle, and she said, you know, I was the best violinist in the state of Washington. Just was. Then I moved to New York. I now live on West End Avenue in one of those pre-war high-rises, along with a lot of other great musicians. He says, I'm not even the best musician on my floor.
It's a good story.
So that just says something about the level of busking in Manhattan. Although he was in Washington, but I'm sure it's a similar story in Washington.
Sure.
That's apropos of not much, not apropos of your poem, sir.
I always wondered to myself if it would have been any different if it hadn't been rush hour, but that produces the conflict that's interesting, that people have to worry whether they can be late for work or not.
Right, right. No, I mean, the difference between a Joshua Bell and another brilliant freelancer, you know, that's interesting. What is it's like a difference between the #1 tennis player in the world and the #10 tennis player in the world. There's that book called Levels of the Game. I mean, the absolute preeminent people are only marginally better than the ones that are like marginally worse.
No question.
And you certainly won't notice it, you know, going through a subway station.
Well, the nature of musical performance is such that, unlike tennis, you can't put the best player in the world and the 100th best player in the world together to illuminate that fine difference. You don't have two violinists facing off against each other.
Right.
And so you probably can't even duplicate the circumstances under which you hear one and then hear another on another day. So all you know, and I've walked by buskers in many circumstances where I wasn't free to stop. But I listened really closely as I was walking and was just deeply impressed. But they never knew it. It just, you know, I heard it from afar, heard it get louder, heard it dwindle, and then I was off to wherever I needed to get to. But I say this all the time, there is no shortage of talent in the world.
Absolutely.
There is, however, a shortage of taste in the world.
Oh, well.
So, but yes, thank you. That's a good one, and it's a natural setup for my Pavarotti one that I'll be doing next. But Dan, you come first.
Okay, so now this is a longer one, and it's funny, we talked with your poem, Al, about how poems do or do not owe something to what really happened. And every so often something really happened that's just so good you really don't have to do very much to it. What really happened is about as good as it could be.
Yes.
And it's handed to you on a platter. Just maybe 5 times in your life you have some anecdote or some incident and this poem pretty much is not tampered with. It's pretty much the way it happened. It's called Score One. Saying that you just can't win isn't quite to say you never can. Take what happened one day in a class I was giving. This was back when I was visiting in music at a college that it's fairly safe to say you wouldn't have heard of. So I'm up in front of this Music 1 type class, big class, being held in as much an amphitheater as a hall. Up there giving them the deal on rhythm, meaning getting them sold on just how significant a thing it really is, at any rate trying. There was this little exercise I used to work in here. Tap out a rhythm with a pen top and see if anyone could recognize the song that I was tapping from only that. which everybody's fairly decent at, given that you use the right song. The Bear Went Over the Mountain is a good one, for he's a jolly good fellow gets it done as well. Whereas some couldn't be more wrong. The Flight of the Bumblebee, for instance. Though even there'd be at least a chance if you let it go on long enough, which would take 2 hands and 2 pens if you were really going to do it. Anyway, I start off as usual, with the self-same bear above a deuce, which many of them hear as readily as ever. Follow up with a couple more near as easy ones, by way of building up their confidence, and find myself looking at a group that, whether or not they know exactly what all this is even getting at, they're soaring on the wings of a new mastery, itself an unsmall thing, yes?
Mhm.
So it's a bit of a role they're on, when a hand has the gall to go up. A kid wondering if I would mind if he tried one on me. One furthermore that while I should know, he doesn't think I do know. Should know but don't know. Now that could be what? Go ahead, I tell him. Let's hear what you've got. And slip my pen back into my pocket and stand there waiting. Whereupon he starts clapping out some hymn kind of thing or march thing or some such. Not a lot to go on, beyond what he has to go on in not expecting me to know. Also not a lot if you consider. There's the bare fact of my position, the fact that it's a visiting position. No sooner have I uttered alma mater than everybody's rising up as one, applying hands to hearts and launching in.
Thanks. That's such a great moment.
Such a nice victory.
Yes, for once, I won. Doesn't happen much, but sometimes you win.
Well, I like the way you lead the reader up to the 3 dots that indicate the thinking that puts 2 and 2 together. You know, the bare fact of my position, the fact that it's a visiting position. So that's 1, 2, and the 3rd hammer blow is what leads you to your conclusion. Of course, they're satisfied with alma mater. If the school had a name to their alma mater, you wouldn't have any way of knowing it, right?
I might have known it, but I didn't know it in this case.
That's all he needed, just to hear
Yeah.
alma mater.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he thought I wouldn't know it, the kid that asked the question, well, I went through the train of thought exactly as expressed here in the poem. I
Yes.
didn't know the name of the alma mater, but I said, well, maybe probably it's the alma mater. Why would I wouldn't know the alma mater. And it kind of sounds like it might be an alma mater.
Yes.
So I took my shot, but what was nice was that they didn't say yes. They just all stood up and went like that, started singing it.
Well, you won. But
I won.
What's interesting is exactly how much your musicianship helped you win.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's true. Guilty as charged.
Absolutely. And they didn't even applaud first. They should have.
No, it was a sacred moment for them.
Well, a couple of things about this. When did this event take place?
In the late 70s.
Do you think it could happen today?
I don't know. I mean, it might depend on the college. Some colleges have kept that feeling. And
Yeah, I wonder.
Some it's a more cynical age.
Yeah.
I mean, this college, I'll reveal the name of the college because I didn't want to be name dropping in this poem, but the college was Dartmouth. I was teaching at Dartmouth.
Oh.
And Dartmouth has a very strong, collegial, for want of a better word, ethos. And, but then you're right. Those days in general, colleges might have had more of that spirit than they do now. That seems entirely possible. Sure.
Well, the other thing that I want to say about this is that when we put it in the context of its time, still, what the ending tells me is that they liked you and were comfortable with you.
Yeah, I agree. If you infer that from what they did, I think that's a reasonable inference. Yes.
So it must have been a good feeling, not just to get it right, but, you know, to have this kind of universal acknowledgement, unbidden.
No, it was not just to get it right. And also, I was moved by their affection for their school and for that alma mater. I
Yeah,
mean, as a musician, I'm moved to see music mean something to people. And this
yes.
alma mater meant something to these 120 kids, and I was moved by that. It was a wonderful experience.
Well, that's interesting because as a teacher of many years, I was annoyed at the kid and the way he tried to trip you up.
Yeah, he thought he had me,
Yes.
no doubt about it.
Yep. Well, you characterized this exactly right before you read it, when you said that sometimes, perhaps just a handful of times in your life, what happens is all you need. This is a great experience to have had, and you've captured it. And to the extent that you can give it to any of the rest of us, you've done so.
Oh,
So that's great. You know,
Good. I mean, the challenge is to make it's not the simple, it's a little involved, and there's rhythms and there's a joke in there. I don't know if it came through or not, that, you know, certain songs lend themselves better to this pen tapping than others.
yes,
And The Bear Went Over the Mountain is a good one.
yes,
But then I say also, you could also use For He's a Jolly Good Fellow, which of course is exactly the same song.
yes.
but
So
not
that's a
the
little-
flight of the bumblebee.
The
So that's
flight
a
of the
little-
Flight of the Bumblebee would not be a good one, though. And I don't.
No, it couldn't be worse. The Flight of the Bumblebee is the worst conceivable song to try to recognize. Although, as I say here, if you kept doing it for a while, it might occur to me that it was the Flight of the Bumblebee, because it's a perpetual motion melody where it just goes on and on and on and on. It could, but if you just did a little of it, a measure or so, then of course there'd be no way of knowing what the heck it is.
If I were to try to do it, I would use 2 pens, because
Oh,
you've got to
that's
be
what I
able. You got to be able to accent harder to indicate the accents as because the melody's got so many notes.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think I could physically do it with 1 pen. But
well, you
you're
couldn't
right.
do the flight. You couldn't do the Flight of the Bumblebee. You could do The Bear Went Over the Mountain. You could do that.
No, you could do the Flight of the Bumblebee, but you'd have to slow it down.
Yeah, no, I mean, to do it right, you'd have to you do what I say, it needs 2 pens. If you wanted to let it go on a long time, you couldn't keep it up. Your wrist would fall off.
Yeah, right. Well, you chose wisely.
Good. Now, you know, I don't think this poem requires a lot of it's not particularly profound, but I, you know, sometimes you want to capture something so it doesnn't vanish into nothing. So this is,
Yeah, it's a great moment, a great human moment captured pretty much completely. I mean, given that none of us could be there, I still get the feeling.
Great. I'm glad it came through.
Oh, yes.
And of course, and it is done in your distinctive voice. So they're soaring on the wings of a new mastery, itself an unsmall thing. Yes.
Yeah,
Itself an unsmall thing. Yes. When I hear that, I think Dan Brown.
Wow. Okay. I'll take it.
It's just it's a little kernel, from the Dan Brown cob.
Nice. Thank you, Al. It's nice to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the spirit of it is so great. I mean, and that's something that you do so well. Okay, I guess I've got to. This is such a strange situation that I felt I needed to write about it, but it's an unsettling and a sad situation. And this is one part of a larger 3-part poem called The Choosers. The first part of which was about Beethoven conducting the 9th Symphony and not knowing that the sopranos didn't sing. He also by the way, concluded the symphony after the orchestra. They stopped, and he was so rapt, kept conducting, and nonetheless the audience applauded, and he had to be turned around so he could see that they were applauding. So that was the first poem of this trio. This is the last. It's called Replay, and it's based on an event near the end of Luciano Pavarotti's career and life, as it turned out. Luciano Pavarotti's accompanist revealed that due to the singer's illness, his final public performance of Nessun Dorma at the opening ceremony of the 2006 Winter Olympics in Turin was lip-synced to a recording made earlier at his home. The orchestra also pretended to play their performance having been recorded at a different time and place. The crowd applauded wildly, unaware. That's just a setup. Here's the poem. The singer sets the mask, positions teeth and tongue, puts feet the proper width apart, squares up the shoulders, draws them back, then drops the diaphragm, takes in a gallon's breath and sends it out again without a sound. Luciano stands before a frieze of faces, another Nessun Dorma rolling out, enveloping the listeners as before, but this one hollow at its center, sung into the box a week ago and pumped out through speakers now. The orchestra assisting the charade, yet seen and heard as an unbroken whole throughout the crowd. A modern artist, he has learned to work with boxes. Since the days of sound on film, self-imitation is an expertise. He fills each glass of gesture to the brim, his present taking orders from his past, and the illusion moves the audience, using the lie which tells us the truth. The genuine reaction justifies. Time passing, nature keeping everything from happening at once, as Einstein said, perceived inviolate to human eyes and ears, except for the odd echo, dimmed, diminished, clearly mere derivative, held sway, unchanged 1,000 generations, each life spooled out in an unbroken line, uninterrupted continuity, until invention of the boxes. Thieves of light and thunder, freezers of the lilt whose fluid play waved in the memory. They shattered one illusion through 10,000 in its place. Was gain outcried by loss? Those Africans who shuddered from the box, afraid the camera would hail their souls out of their bodies, understood. An essence captured, multiplied, and then released again, misleads as it reveals itself. The crowd responds to Pavarotti's sound, but what he hears, he will not sing again. His body has become a ghost, gone on ahead into the silence, while his voice, invited as a guest, has come to haunt his funeral. He stands as thousands cheer and listens to last week. An ocean paused to hear itself resounding in its shell.
That's really powerful, Al. And
It's so sad. Yeah.
So sad.
I'm
Absolutely.
sorry, it is so sad. It is true that you have to learn how to lip sync. And it's a whole study. I mean, it's easier to lip sync to one of your own performances, which is what he was doing here. But the fact of lip syncing to yourself when you can no longer produce the performance you're pretending seems just so poignant to me, and so
It is indeed.
just so unfair. And as I said to you earlier before we began, Carolyn, this is something that a singer from an earlier part of the century or from earlier centuries could never have experienced.
Right.
I mean, until they began to film opera, for example, singers didn't have to mimic their own performance. And it's tricky. For some people, it's easier to actually sing when you're lip syncing.
Right.
For others, it's not. It depends. It depends on your approach to phrasing, because there are people who never phrase things the same way exactly twice, and there are people who can only phrase things the way they work it out. And if you belong to the first group, it's very hard to sing and lip sync to yourself. So you have to not produce the sound and just focus on the mask, on what your lips are doing. I've had to learn to do it on a few occasions, and it's an interesting study, but it's, it's so trivial compared to what he could actually do and then couldn't actually do.
It must have been hard for, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead, please.
I was going to say it must have been hard for him to simulate all the air intake, because every time I saw him, there were these big movements of air that he took in to make those wonderful sounds, and he had to simulate those.
Well, it's not so hard to simulate the intake, but to lip sync if you're not singing leaves you the problem of how to let out the breath.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Without engaging, your vocal cords.
Yeah.
That I've got to think about that. For an opera singer, that's a much bigger problem than for somebody singing in a pop genre like I do, where I only I take breaths. I mean, I try to extend within a breath, phrases over the breath, because it allows you. I mean, I'm coming out of a bel canto tradition because I learned from Sinatra. So the idea is to extend the line, and so to extend the breath. But I don't have to take that kind of breath. So,
well, one little wrinkle, since we're talking, is that I think an opera singer has worked out exactly when they're going to breathe before.
Oh, absolutely.
And they breathe exactly the same way every time they sing it. And Pavarotti, having sung Nessun Dorma 8,000 times,
yes,
as a lip syncer, he knew when he was going to have to inhale, when he was going to have to do his next inhalation. So it probably wasn't. He probably heard it so many times. I've been very impressed by lip syncing. I think it's hard to get such fidelity. I'm always impressed when I know someone is lip syncing. I'm usually impressed with how well they do it, honestly. Even though it's not quite, you can tell it's not quite being really sung, but it's so close. And all the mugging and the facial expressions, and if they have little incidental comments and stuff like that, I think they've heard their own shtick so many times, they've internalized it, and they can play it back kind of. To me, it's an impressive feat.
Well, I have a video I'll try out on you, and you can tell me if I pass muster.
Oh, okay. I'll be an easy audience for you there, I'm sure.
Well, you're knowing ahead of time that I'm lip syncing, so that there's no opportunity to fool you. Yeah. But at least you can be more critical. But I take your point.
I just to the poem, I just wanted to say I do like this move at the end to the Africans being afraid of the camera capturing their spirits, their souls. That's a neat connection that is very unexpected, and I think it's very apt.
Well, what I wasn't able to do when reading it was to show people that on the page, those 3 stanzas are italicized, right, and they're indented. So there's no attempt to pass off the change in tone and the change in regulation of the
Right.
language. But it was hard to do when reading it. But just to build on your point, because you're absolutely right, I'm sure Luciano took breaths in exactly the same places every time in Nessun Dorma. But the thing that I said about altering your phrasing is also still true, that even though you take, so what that means is you're singing the same phrases for each breath. You're not trying to add a phrase or breathe before you're done. So, but how you execute within those phrases is subject to elasticity, and it has
Sure.
to be because you're working with an orchestra. And so you've got to be plastic, and if the conductor isn't just a hide beater, you've got to move with the way the orchestra is shaping the phrases as well.
Right.
So there's ample opportunity for subtleties of change that would throw a lip sync off, for example, if you were that kind of singer. So anyway, so that's I'm glad that some of that came across, the bit about the boxes, because the 3-part poem is about hearing and listening, producing sound, being misled by what you do or don't hear, what you see or don't see. And the poem in the middle was also like that, which the viewers didn't get to hear. So that's why there was a diversion into ancient history. But there's something to be said for that we're living in a time now where too much of us has been captured. And if any of it is lost, and if we don't get it, if we're diminished in any way by every picture that's taken of us, we're in a lot of trouble. But the thing that I say about capturing a sound and then multiplying it and then sending it back out is, of course, something that I've been doing for most of my adult life. And you start to think about it. I'm in the middle of, I have a record coming out at the end of the month that's a retrospective of the 25 years of my recording career. And so I have recordings from 25 years ago. And I think about this, and I think, in 25 years from now, all there will be of me is what got captured in the boxes. And that gives one pause.
But it's a legacy now. It's a nice legacy.
Well,
and what you put on the page.
True.
Yeah, you hope so. You hope that people will try to recover from the pieces that you leave behind something of the completeness of you.
Yep.
Or you to you two. But who knows? I tricked myself into thinking that I really know Robert Frost, but I never met the man. So what do we really know? Anyway, last round.
Okay. My husband and I have been going to the opera for many, many years. In fact, we were going to the Metropolitan Opera before they had any subtitles. What they have now, which is wonderful, I even got my son to go, is they have the translation in English or whatever language you want right in the back of the seat in front of you. So you can even look down, well, we're up in the balcony, look down at the stage and read the titles if you so choose. But back in 1985, which is when this story took place, there were no titles. And I was getting used to loving Wagner. And I had trouble with the second act of Die Walküre because it's got an hour and a half of two singers singing at each other, to each other. And I didn't know what they were saying. And we had seen it several times, and I had finally had it. So this is A Night at the Opera, Die Walküre at the Met. And I dedicated it to my husband so he would laugh. Wagner remains the pinnacle for him, especially the saga called The Ring. 4 operas, I had 15 hours. 4 operas, 15 hours. Some would trim protracted dialogues, a wish to bring this marathon more swiftly to a close. A blasphemy as any Wagnerite knows. I must admit that now I am a fan. It wasn't always so. There was a time Walküre's second act seemed duller than a 5th declension Latin paradigm. For 90 minutes, nothing moved but air. I wished I could be anywhere but there. Today, the English titles kindly beam the dialogue and let the listener in. One night I realized a daring scheme, an escapade I could bequeath to kin. Before the second act, I disappear, returning for the third, a mutineer. I trembled as the first act curtain fell, waved to my husband, ran across the street to buy a movie ticket. I was well into the first half hour before my feet permitted me to watch the screen. And while the plot was sad, I couldn't curb my smile. After, because I had some extra time, an ice cream soda. Then I made a call to tell my children of their mother's crime. Claiming my vacant seat was best of all. Movie, I said, and struck a victor's pose. Of course, he muttered as the curtain rose.
I love that.
Me too.
It was fun. It was fun.
I love the way you call your children while you're playing truant, right?
Well, they have to know that I do evil things too.
But you were still doing them when you made the call. This is something I really enjoy, that you couldn't even wait to finish the stunt.
Well, I
them.
I also had extra time and had to appear exactly at the right moment before the
Certainly. Yes. Wow. Well, it must be asked, what was the movie?
It was called My Life as a Dog. It was a Swedish film.
Yeah, it's a foreign film. I remember it.
And sad.
Wow. Did you have any other options, or was that your only?
Oh, I was in a hurry. I came and I walked over and I said, what's starting now and how long is it?
Great. Oh, great. Well,
Yeah,
I think it's. Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
No, I really am very taken with this anecdote, and I love the way you say an escapade I could bequeath to kin. That seems a little odd at first, but right away we're into parents, mothers, parents' eye view of life, which I don't have. So it took me to a place, that where I'm not.
Well, the other thing, which of course my children would know, and my friends, is that I'm rather square at following rules. I don't water on odd days when I'm supposed to water on evenings. And so doing something like this was a real departure, and I thought the kids would enjoy it.
And you bring it back and to tell my children of their mother's crime. So then you fulfill the, it's funny in music, there are, in Beethoven in particular, sometimes near the beginning of a piece, like in the beginning of the very beginning of the Eroica Symphony, there's a note, a D flat, which doesn't belong in the key. And it's startling. And since it's Beethoven, that somewhere later, that D flat is going to become meaningful. It's going to take you to a different key, or he's going to do something with it. It's not just a throwaway shock thing. It's going to, so to me, I mean, this is a little of the same kind of effect. That escapade to kin has its ramification later on in the poem, which I really like.
Oh, thank you.
And I love his, of course. I mean, that's just such a great, I mean, it's funny, and it also makes you wonder, like, of course, that either means he knew that you love movies, or you've pulled this stunt before, and he knew that you'd gone to movies before.
He was just being sarcastic. He had no idea what I had done.
He had no idea what you'd done until you said that. That's funny. That's a very funny story, and it's very well rendered. It's, you know, there's a lot of information in here. It's very gracefully, you know, efficiently and gracefully done. Even to the fact of saying that, you know, you got to the movie, it already had been going for half an hour. Because if you got to the whole 2-hour movie, that's longer than the second act of Die Valkyrie. And yet you still, and on the other hand, you did have time for an ice cream soda first. Even that, and still getting back in time. So there's a lot of, you know, a lot of real data's in this thing that really makes it real and makes it fun to follow. I really liked it.
Thank you. The interesting part to me is that some of my oldest friends think it was my major contribution, not contribution, but most memorable act, and I don't agree.
Well, what is your most memorable act?
Oh, I haven't worked on that, but I mean, this is what they can't forget because they know my husband and his fanatic attachment to Wagner.
That's funny.
Yeah, you really did. It was really a, what's the word? Insubordinate act.
Good word. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyway, it was fun.
Well, that's a great one for you to round out your group of 5. That's humor is always a great note to strike on your way out. Well, shall we go to you, Dan, and then I'll try to tie a bow on the proceedings?
Okay, if you insist.
And I do.
You do. So this is another long one, called In Paradisum. I don't think it needs any. I don't think it needs any introduction. She devoted some of the morning to wrapping up a bed, her body shutting down, the rest to being dead. That afternoon, amid a gaping herlessness, I was musing on how, in her starting as a Christian, a serious if private one, then adding, in an effort to take in hand a midlife slam of chronic pain, a Buddhist strand, she'd come to believe in 2 afterlife alternatives, given the alternative. That's 2 more afterlives than any with which my credence had had a thing to do. Whereas I had no trouble believing WQXR FM was out to mess with me in airing a requiem that evening, especially a bit, an In Paradisum, that was pure Empyrean, a lay for solo angel, complete with driftings in, at times, of soft caresses from a chorus swathed in strings, with a piping up of organ puffs, with heavenings from, yes, a harp that was unapologetically resorted to. No huge surprise when, in a plea, a God could be excused for taking for a prayer, I plummet into please, please, please let her be there. A sinking of the head, a welling in the eyes, a shimmer to the room, and look, in paradise. Imaging the ange, enabled by Fauré to sing supernally, she's floating forth a lay herself, and with a lilt that gladdens to the core. A voice I'd always loved, a loveliness the more, in being haloed by an accoutrement of old that's issued at the gate. A harp of glowing gold, its dizzying of strings, so silvery arrayed, that helps a heaven be before it's even played. Her song, a rivulet a-glitter, if you will, its spangles made to seem to shine the brighter still, by undershadows as of matters dwelt upon. Depths it's difficult to put one's finger on. You know the way in Bach, a strand of melody will weave within itself its own polyphony. Perhaps her being freed from anguish has imbued her song of jubilance with one of gratitude. Excuse me, but what kind of realist was I to carry on like this? Would you listen to the guy, lofting a request that more than posited a pretty blissy life for someone who was dead? A plea that nonetheless could strike the pleader's ear as something being cried to something that could hear.
Mm,
That's
mm,
really very touching and wonderful.
Oh,
the language is, there's so many new minted words and phrases that just, this is studied with turns of language that I've never seen or heard before from you or from anyone. I mean, there's so many of them, and you do it with such, you do it with an ease that completely conceals whatever effort might have been involved, because this is not sort of being plain spoken at all. But oh my, I mean, you kind of fire the warning shot just right away in line. Well, you do it within the phrase in line 6, a gaping herlessness. You do it in the first stanza with this really novel way of stretching the day across the death by using the devoting some of the day to this and the rest of the day to that. I don't know that I've ever heard two such different levels of reality put under that arc in this way. So you announce from the opening gun that you're going to be telling us something in a way that we can't anticipate or predict. And yet then you go ahead and tell us all this stuff that you could translate this into, well, here's a person who was a Christian for a long time, but then, she had a lot of difficulties in her life. And later on, she kind of turned to Buddhism. And that's a perfectly understandable narrative thread. But the way that you say it, I mean, starting as a Christian, a serious and private one, then adding in an effort to take in hand a midlife slam of chronic pain, a Buddhist strand. It's very original.
Oh, most. And the rhyme is wonderful. And I think it adds enormously in the second and fourth lines.
great.
Yeah. Was this a lot of work to write, or did it just come out?
Well, the usual amount of work, which I guess is a lot. I mean, it wasn't, yeah. I mean, I will say that, I mean, yeah, they all usually take take a fair amount of work. I don't, but one lesson that might be taken away from this poem is that this story, which is basically a true story, it's about the death of my first wife. Excuse me, see, I've had a long night here already. It's late at night. It's my second wife. I'm a widower. I told this story to many people. This, how that, just the way I say it here, that requiem came on that night. And, I may be an agnostic or whatever you call me, but I was saying, please let her be in heaven.
Yes.
And,
it's quite beautiful. It really is.
yeah. And I'm saying this because if you find yourself telling a story to people over the years repeatedly, particularly maybe people you don't know even, but just, it may take you years to realize that story might be fit for being made into a poem. You sometimes don't realize it because it's so close to you. It seems so much a part of your life. You think, well, poetry
Yes.
is art. It's this other realm, and then there's your. But more than once, I found that an anecdote or a story that I've told, or a train of thought, or something that I've related to people over the years, it's almost like I slap my head and I say, how could I not have thought of, 10 years before that this would be material that had some potential to be turned into a poem?
Hmm.
And as soon as it occurred to me, I immediately said to myself, yikes, I mean, this has a lot of potential to be turned into a poem, in my view, as near as I could be objective about it. And so I launched into it with a fair amount of verve and thinking, all right, I'm going to give this one a go.
Well, were
And
you aware of trying to use language in that you needed to use language in a different way?
I don't
Be-
really think so, Al. Not really.
wow.
Um, no, I
I
didn't
mean,
think it. No, I guess the answer would be no.
heavenings
Heavenings, yeah,
from
there are a
yes.
few of
So
those, right? Yeah.
yeah, there are some created words, but you know, a lay for solo angel, complete with driftings in at times of soft caresses from a chorus swathed in strings. This may have been an anecdote that you told, but you've turned it into a poem. I mean, it's poeticized to the nth degree. I mean, this is super poetic. And it's funny because were you aware of at all of Fauré or Fauré's manner, Fauré's style in the Requiem when you were using words?
No, I wasn't trying to do the verbal equivalent of Fauré's really unique style in that requiem. This is right. No, the answer is no. But this is, of all the poems I've read of mine tonight, this is the one where I'm actually trying to evoke music. I'm trying to do that hard thing, which is to
Well,
to communicate some of what the actual music sounds like, not to excess, but even not so much, but at least a little bit. And
yeah.
and I think that trying to do that might have moved me, lifted me, or whatever, shoved me into a realm where I was using words to try to be equal to the occasion of this fantastic music.
Well, for by whatever means, you've definitely moved beyond in this poem anything stylistically that I've seen. And I mean, I have some of your books, and I've seen a lot of your recent work, but this is the opposite of what you uh, almost all the time do so well, which is to simultaneously achieve a density that elevates what also is very conversational.
Yes,
and
that's what I was going to say too.
and uses the aside, and it's a thing that I in the workshops that I call the Dan Brown voice. But this is not you talking. This is you singing or something. It's different.
No, I agree. I mean, I do think it has touches of the conversational in it.
Yes,
So
indeed.
you can see
Yeah.
them there. That's two more afterlives that, given the alternative, that's two more afterlives than any of the, and without to mess with me, or the thing at the end there. Excuse me, what kind of realist was I to carry on like? Would you listen to the guy?
Yes, I love that part, and I also like a pretty
Yeah.
blissy life.
A pretty blissy life. So I mean, it has
Yeah.
touches of the conversational. It mixes them a little bit.
Yeah. You're still.
But
I
at the
mean,
same, but there's whole stretches of it where that's not there. I agree with that.
exactly. And I have not seen that from you, and it's wonderful to see because the language is handled in an utterly fresh and apt way. I mean, it's original to me.
Well, that's very gratifying to hear from that both of you, that the poem works so well for both of you.
Oh, very well.
I do want to just make one musical point, since our subject is music, for the folks that might be wondering what I was talking about in this thing about Bach. Where is that part?
Where the
Yeah,
melody
you
turns
know
on itself.
Yeah, you know the way in Bach a strand of melody will weave within itself its own polyphony. So I'm referring there to a very specific thing that's very characteristic of Bach, and you hear it most easily in his pieces for unaccompanied cello or unaccompanied violin, where it's basically one line of music, but he's implying more than one line of music. He's implying a melody and a bass. In fact, I was going to get a YouTube clip teed up so I could play you an example of what I'm talking about from one of the cello suites. But I mean, to the point where he actually writes, if you think about it, he writes a fugue for solo violin. Now you have to think he writes a 3-voice fugue for solo violin. How could that even be? And yet he does. Some of it is done with so-called double stops and playing more than one string at a time. But a lot of it is done by dividing the melody instant by instant into a high part and a low part, and then a high part and a low part. And if you string the high parts together, that's one line. And if you string the low parts together, that's another line implied. And so that's a specific technique in Bach that I'm adducing there. I just wanted to call that out for the music heads or the potential music heads in the whoever's listening.
That's great. Thank you for illuminating that, because I had a general sense of that, but you've specified it.
You're welcome.
Well, this is great. I'm really glad that you concluded your group with this one, because it's just a standout in so many ways.
Right.
I mean, the circumstances which engendered it are so unique and specific that I don't suppose you could just dial another one up on demand. But to have done this once is to have done something that literally I've never seen anyone else do.
Well, what can I say? I'm very, very touched and gratified to hear that. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, I love this. Bravo to you. Well, of course, now you're kind of a dirty dog for forcing me to follow you.
Well, I knew it was you coming last, so I figured if they're gonna hurt anybody, it ought to be you, Alison.
I think that's correct. So, of course, the only way to follow something that takes you to a real high point is to scroll everything back down and move somewhere completely different. And so that's what I do in this poem. It's called "The Horn in Me." And it's an attempt to kind of tell the biography of my relationship with my instrument, which, except for 5 years when I was in college in the Army and 5 days when I was in the hospital 6 years ago, I have played my instrument every day of my life. And brass instruments don't get a whole lot of attention. And so I'm giving it some attention. So this is what I do every day, twice a day. The horn in me, rim width, bore and back bore, depth of cup and cup configuration. The machinist tools to the specifics where the metal meets the lips. For the directed breath, the mouthpiece is both barrier and entrance. I set the embouchure. The muscles of the facial ring fall into place around the polished rim. The pressure of the lips enough to keep the seal, but still relaxed between the tensed up corners of the mouth. I breathe in from the diaphragm, the broad trunk muscles flex in concert as I lean over my solar plexus. Then the air, swift and pure in focus, concentrated up from my lungs, sets both my lips abuzz, pours down into the mouthpiece opening. The horn responds. It vibrates into voice, and I begin the daily litany. Long tones, lip slurs, scales, arpeggios up and down across the octaves. Once begun, I may not take the mouthpiece from my lips until it's done. Some days the horn agrees, allows me sound without a challenge. The notes unfurl like crisp flags in a breeze. On other days, the venture drifts awry, beginning with some small impediment, a slight change in position of the lips, some undigested morsel in my system, my picking up the breath too far above bedrock position, any all contrive to tick the airstream off its axis. Then the struggle to relax and strive at once begins. The tones lunge into imprecision, and moving up the scale becomes a gauntlet of thinned out, bulged, or cracked and raspy notes. Or when the horn balks at the push, air-stopped silence. Tempted to rebel, the will must gentle down, and patience settle in throughout my body, led along a path by hard-won increments up to completion. But easy day or not, the horn abides. Its large bore pipes, kept whistle clean and open, demand from me exactly what they did decades ago. I am the variable. The cornet holds the mirror up to me. My nature is revealed, precisely what I bring to each encounter. Unconcerned that I succeed or fail, the horn exacts its due and renders judgment audible. It lines my body up behind my breath, corrects me.
That's so instructive, Al. Oh, it really is. And I didn't mean it I meant it in a very complimentary way. It shows me something I don't know about an instrument I never played, and I'm very impressed.
Well, thank you for that is one of the clear objectives of the poem. And I really hoped that I would explain and illuminate the daily struggle.
Oh, yes.
Because people don't know what it is. They would have no way of knowing. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, this is so rich in what I guess I'll call a documentary sense.
Mm.
You know, only someone that's done this for 60 years could write a poem in such detail about all the elements that go into this regime and this practice, like almost in a monkish spiritual sense.
Yeah.
Then having gone through all the particulars, which are really, you're hearing this from someone that does this. I mean, all the lips and, diaphragm. Oh, this is the technical nitty gritty of a practice regimen, down to the very granular detail, which is just very interesting and instructive, as Carolyn says. And then in the last part of the poem, we move up a little bit into more of the human side, the spiritual side, the kind of discipline, we're into what a monk is going to get out of his or her practice, spiritually, revealing yourself, learning about yourself, hopefully, evolving yourself or improving yourself, being corrected by the practice. And that's lovely. Corrects me is one. I am the variable is a very important thing. It's I think it matters that it's not that this instrument that's disciplining you in this way is made of metal. You're made of flesh. You're soft. This thing is made of brass, and you are definitely the variable compared to it. It is, I mean, even a violin, its strings, bend and wood breathes. This thing is just made out of metal. I mean, I guess it does change when it gets hot and cold and the humidity probably, but basically it's invariant. You're the variable. So I think that's a very core line. And I
Yeah,
think I just also want to say that this reminds me of a documentary that I saw not too long ago about on Doc Severinsen. I don't know if you've seen that
oh,
documentary or not.
no, I haven't, but he was a tremendous executant,
Well,
great player.
if you've never seen it, then I'm startled, and I couldn't recommend it more highly.
Yes.
You'd probably find it more fascinating than any other human being on the face of the earth. And part of it is he's up in his 70s, mid 70s, whatever it is, every day to keep being Doc Severinsen, to keep being able to play in front of the public on that level.
Yep.
He can't, if he misses a day, it'd take him 20 days to get it back. That's the sort of feeling that you got.
That's why I don't miss a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I don't, when I missed 5 days in the hospital 6 years ago, it took me a couple of months to be all the way back.
Wow. Wow.
So, I mean, it's fear. It's too much. I don't want to do all that work again.
Right.
But yeah, and I've learned things from Severinsen just from hearing him talk a little bit. So that's something that I'd absolutely be interested in looking up. But the thing that you say about it being a brass instrument, there's another dimension to that, and that is that I've worked for most of my adult life alongside sax players, and sax players have complicated instruments. Their pads leak, they get out of alignment. They have to use reeds that are different every time they play them.
Right.
They buy reeds. The reeds aren't any good. They buy a box of reeds and there are only 4 that are usable. They bitch and moan and have done so for decades. And it's always something. I don't have the luxury of blaming my instrument. If I sound bad, there's only one person at fault. So yeah, the horn is completely on. It's like all of nature. It's indifferent. It's passive to my problems.
Right.
Couldn't care less.
What I like so much, Al, about the poem is that you spend a lot of time on details that were very instructive to me, and I enjoyed. But then you turn around and you say, tempted to rebel, the will must gentle down. So it's not the technique, it's not all the practice, it's the frame of mind and the feeling and the emotion. And that's a lovely contrast, no matter how prepared you are.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for noticing that, because it really is. There are moments when, and this is kind of a subtle thing, but it's a true thing. When you're going bad, and there are reasons for why you go bad, the impulse is to, because you get frustrated, is to try to do what you're doing harder. And that is always the wrong direction to go in. Mm-hmm. And so in order to do the correct physical thing, you have to change your emotion. You have to stop being frustrated. And you have to the will must be gentled down in order for you to find the way out of this thicket that you're stuck in. And there's a great lesson there. I mean, it really is. It is a parallel life in some respects to that of the monk. That we have to master our impulses in order to find the way. And so I really have a relationship with my instrument that it's got a religious component to it, because it reminds me that I'm always coping with being fallible, and that if I step 1 foot off the correct path, I can make my life harder. So I mean, with a practice like that, you don't need too many commandments. So, well, this has been a fabulous conversation. I knew it might go for a while, and it's gone very long. But thank you so very much. I really thought I was done with shows about music, but this has been a great one. I'm really grateful to you two for what you brought to this and what you made me go back and drag out of my back pages.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure, Al. I really, you gave me a chance to come back a second time. I enjoyed the first time, and this was, another wonderful experience. So thank you for having me back. And Carolyn, great to see you. Great to read these beautiful poems and to.
It was a lot of fun. The three of us did very well together. We worked.
I think so. Yep.
I agree. So let me say goodnight, and I will edit out that one little stretch. So we should all live and be well, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
So long.
Good night.